Good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN Weekly for Saturday, August 14th, 2021. And our top story today, why have retail versions of private equity funds returned so poorly? Well, joining me now to discuss this and a lot more is Jason Bisnoff. He's a journalist with Forbes. Jason, so great to see you again. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Hey, Jeff. Thanks for having me back. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, it's great, and love your reporting on the wealth management and asset management industry. You and your colleague Antoine Guerra just released a really interesting piece on private equity for retail investors. What can you tell us?
Yes, so private equity obviously has a historic reputation as one of the great wealth makers on Wall Street. And from an institutional standpoint, when it was very high-end, high finance, it was a very lucrative market in the 90s, in the early 2000s. And it kind of built out this reputation, especially, the big name firms, the KKRs, the Blackstones, the type that people, I think look at and their eyes glaze over. They don't know what they do, but they know they have a lot of money. And those, the problem is that when you dig in, especially with their initial internal rates of return, IRRs, which is something that when you find out that's the major metric, you're like, oh, really? Like they just internally compute it? There is some left to be desired. And so that was what our story was really about mostly. I'm going to leave it to you to ask me what else is interesting.
Yeah, no, I want to ask you, I want to talk about, so typically in the past, this has been an asset class that is available for institutional investors, endowments, foundations, pension funds, large family offices, etc. But now there's a move afoot to move it into retail investors. We actually see this with 401ks. What did you learn in terms of, a push for defined contribution plans in particular? What did you learn in terms of transparency and maybe the fees assessed for potential retail investors?
Yeah, that ended up being the kicker of the story. And that's kind of one of the more interesting elements is between it being this institutional, very high finance vehicle and it becoming in mom and pop 401ks and defined contribution plans, it had this middle stop in high net worth accounts, what's it called, accredited investors. And during that stop, it kind of didn't perform how people would want it to. It's a unique environment because right now, if you put in money into an index fund with the S&P 500, your return is higher than it's ever been in the last decade. And so any other vehicle, especially a vehicle like private equity, where you can't touch your money for 10 years, where it is expensive, where it is a lot of fees, has to justify itself as being higher than the benchmark of, like I said, just owning the S&P and FANG and all of that. And it really didn't. And the problem with that is that now under the Trump administration and the Labor Secretary Scalia, there is now a move to get this into retail accounts. And it is a very complicated vehicle. Like I said, it is a vehicle that really was best suited when it was done with very experienced high finance. It may not be a good fit for the industry. It's not for me to decide. But when you start looking and you say, oh, high net worth investors feel very unhappy with what happened in their experience, but we're moving full steam ahead to bring it into more Main Street accounts, it obviously sets off a few alarm bells.
Jason, to that end, you mentioned the term accredited investor. I believe the Securities and Exchange Commission has oversight and recently is announced that they were working on redefining that. Is there additional scrutiny happening with some of our regulatory bodies and also the legislative bodies, the Congress, the U.S. Senate, in terms of these types of investments and making them available?
Well, obviously, everyone in D.C. is very busy. If you're watching the news, there's a lot going on. So I don't think it's exactly on the front burner. But I think the main area where this may come to light, in my opinion, is with regulation best interest. We had this DOL fiduciary rule that was then vacated, and that was setting up a universal fiduciary rule, which would really change the game on which advisors could recommend a private equity fund and then justify it on the back end. That was pared down, and the way that I see it is regulation best interest was kind of this halfway stop to the fact that at some point in our lifetimes, we are going to see a universal fiduciary rule, just the way that things are moving. I know that some in the industry don't want that. It makes it tougher to be more aggressive. And there are some options that get taken off the table that some advisors make a credible argument saying, having that is a handcuff. I just think that's the way the winds are blowing. And I think we're just delaying the inevitable. And I think that would definitely save a lot of this obviously the fact that private equity, and I didn't even know this, it's not within my typical wheelhouse, has such a low threshold of reporting and regulation was shocking to me. I cover the asset and wealth management space, and every firm that I look up has a Form ADV. I can see, or they have quarterly reports if they're the big wirehouses. I can see a lot of what they're doing, a lot of how they're doing, and it's pretty transparent. When you're looking at private equity, the only numbers you have is the internal rate of return, which is, I don't think is dishonestly constructed, but it's constructed in-house at the firm, which is less than ideal, in my opinion.
Yeah, you've got to ask a lot of questions of it when you're investing in these types of assets. What are you hearing from the wealth management community, the RIAs, the brokerage houses, some of whom you just kind of mentioned them? I mean, what is their response? Because a lot of times they've got clients that they're investing their assets into this, and they may have retail clients, the mom and pops that as you described them, that may have an interest. Are you hearing anything positive, negative, or neutral?
Well, one of the problems cited in the story is that there is a lot of distribution deals between private equity firms and the large brokerages, the big four wirehouses, and those specifically had some fees that we thought were a bit high, and it seemed like it was a lot of situations where it really benefited the advisors, benefited private equity at the same time, and the big point of contention on their part, and this is kind of the nature of our very low interest rate environment we're in, was, these returns were good. Just, and kind of the subjective term of what an acceptable return was. The problem is, like I said, and I'm not jealous of advisors the last 10 years. To justify good returns when doing the most basic Vanguard fund returned 10% or more the last decade is really tough to justify doing anything but just doing that. That is not exactly high level financial machinery there. It is, and it's been as good as anything. So I don't envy the fact that when they're trying to justify the private equity fund, all you have to do is hold up the returns on the S&P and say, are these really good returns? But then again, past is not, the past doesn't indicate the future necessarily, and good returns are all subjective. For what it's worth, if I wanted to be a real pain in the butt, I could say, well, why didn't you invest all your clients in AMC and Bitcoin, which aren't exactly the most sound investments, but if we're talking returns, have done as well as anything.
Yeah, I love that catchphrase. As you know, I've been in the industry for I was in the industry for a long time. Past performance does not indicate future results. You got to remember that, Jason, and just spit it out. Jason Bisnoff, it is always a pleasure chatting with you. Great work as always. Love your content. Thank your colleague Antoine Guerra as well. And we look forward to having you back on the program again very soon.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Anytime.
Thanks, Jason. Great to see you. Thanks for sharing your perspective. And when we come back, we'll take a look at some of our best segments for the week. You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN Weekly. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
Are you stuck with a low credit score? A credit report and score that's causing you to be denied credit or pay higher interest rates than others for the same things? Then do what Terrence did and call Credit Repaired for your free credit evaluation to help restore your credit.
I started thinking about buying a new house, and my score wasn't where I needed it to be. I called and spoke with one of the representatives, and we just had a good conversation, and I liked what he was saying.
Just one call for his free credit evaluation was all it took to start back on the track to repairing his credit.
I'm seeing the deletions and I'm getting the report, so I know something's being done. It does make a difference to me.
All it takes is one call to get started.
Credit Repair has given me a second chance to have a better credit score.
Don't let a low credit score hold you back another day. Do what Terrence did and make the call for your free credit evaluation.
Call 800-819-4152. That's 800-819-4152. Again, 800-819-4152.
Welcome back. This week we sat down with Johns Hopkins Medicine's Netta Gould to discuss the state of mental health and how we can help our family and friends. Let's take a look.
It's a really important question. I think it's changed substantially, and not unfortunately in a good way. I think we've seen increases in anxiety and depression, stress related disorders. We've seen increase in substance use and misuse, people considering suicide. And just to kind of give you some perspective, so before the pandemic, we were looking at maybe 1 in 10 US adults reporting anxiety, depressive symptoms, and now it's more along the lines of 4 in 10 adults. So there have been substantial increases in mental health issues. I think that loss of social support and isolation, and then the financial difficulties are major ones. The strain that the pandemic has put on families, travel restrictions, people fearing contracting COVID still, and generally just this sense of unpredictability and uncertainty, which is very challenging for us to deal with. Very few people I feel like have kind of gotten through this pandemic completely unscathed, but the more vulnerable groups, I would say children and young adults, minorities, of course, essential workers, such as healthcare workers, people who've actually experienced job loss, and then the kind of pre-existing vulnerable individuals in terms of psychiatric issues. So individuals who had pre-existing psychiatric conditions are, of course, more vulnerable to have exacerbated symptoms during this time. I think that, yes, the government certainly is trying. This is an issue where we had difficulty with access to mental health care for people before the pandemic. So it's very challenging, I think, to all of a sudden revamp the systems that were in place. But I was reading like SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, recently awarded, I think, $250 million in grants just to increase access to substance use disorder and mental health treatment services. So I think that they recognize how broad of an issue this is that needs to be addressed, and they're working to get this addressed. There's a silver lining to some of these. Looking at this pandemic from the mental health perspective, I would say that yes, there's a decrease in the stigma associated with having mental health issues. I love that the celebrities and people in leadership roles are coming forward and saying, my mental health is important. I think that's such a big step in the right direction. And so I do think that people are being more open about their mental health issues because they need the help. They also recognize that they're not alone. And I'm hoping they continue to recognize that they're not alone. Based on what I'm seeing, they are, and I think it's a wonderful step forward. So I've seen it in my organization, seen it in other organizations. The employers are really recognizing that, we don't have an alternative. This is something that we have to address and make resources available because it's impacting productivity, it's impacting people staying in some workforces. So I'm really happy to see how many employers have stepped up to assist the employees.
And we also sat down with Saul Levinson Brothers, Inc.'s Eliza Feller to discuss end-of-life planning and bringing comfort to friends and family. Let's take a look.
Really, the main thing that I hear is no matter how someone feels coming into the conversation, whether they are reluctant or hesitant or practical about it, or I hate to say looking forward to it, but really motivated to take care of things, no matter how they enter the conversation, at the end, everybody feels relief and they are just grateful that it has taken something of a load off their shoulders and really helped them ease their concerns about what the final arrangements will be. As surveys are done going forward, we're going to see, I think, a big spike, a lot more people making appointments to make the arrangements, and lately, many more people choosing to prepay, choosing to make sure this is just all taken care of. Initially, it was concern, I think, a lot for themselves that COVID really pushed the issue, that they had been thinking of doing this at some point. And for a lot of people, they were really confronted with the potential of their own mortality. But in the past couple of months, I think, as we've seen things shift toward we thought it was over and we're not really sure what's going to happen going forward, is a lot more people recently have been saying they're seeing peers start to die. And it's frightening for them a lot of times unexpectedly. And that is motivating a lot of people to come make arrangements. Historically, that's been the case, but things seem to have been increasing over the past couple months. We are really seeing the average age of people make pre-arrangements. It is coming down. I think partly because of COVID, again, really pushing the issue for people, but also awareness about the entire concept of pre-planning. That in the past, I think there was a lot more of a sense that someone else will take care of that. And now, because of social media, advertising, et cetera, really putting the issue out there, and I think hopefully a shift toward an increase in conversations about death and everything that surrounds that, demystifying it, and really, making it much more of a conversation people are willing to have or understand the importance of, is driving that decrease in the average age. It is an incredibly important piece of end-of-life planning, is thinking a lot about how you want to live as you progress, as your health may change, where you want to live, and also as part of that, what kind of interventions you're comfortable with in terms of life support or, medication versus if there's a terminal illness, do you prefer just comfort measures? And those are incredibly important conversations to have. Now, there are individuals who do help people through that conversation. A lot of states have resources online because many of the documents, they're legal documents, and they may differ from state to state. I think that goes into the whole conversation of deciding not only what you feel strongly about, but also, again, as with anything else, taking into account who's going to be caring for you and what is the burden that's going to be on them. So clearly stating you want to be in a certain facility for a certain amount of time until, X thing happens, at which point you can be moved into another facility, is important, but making those decisions in a vacuum without talking to the people who will be actually having to bring in care or sort out round-the-clock aids if you're going to stay living independently, it's incredibly important to not just make that decision based on what you absolutely want in a perfect universe. Again, it really helps to make those decisions ahead of time in consultation with someone who specializes in this, an elder care attorney, an estate planner, because not only is it what happens with your stuff, but there can also be important decisions about how things are set up ahead of time based on tax implications and all sorts of concerns that a person may not think about or be aware of on their own. But it's about your legacy also, in a way, right? Do you want to give a certain pool of your money to a charity? Do you want all the funds to go to family members, how would that be divided up? Do you want to set some aside for someone's education? These are all really important considerations. And I think, at least I hope, people are thinking about that younger and younger. Just that awareness that this is so important to not just leave until a certain age. We, in one of our resources, provide a place to list all of your digital assets, but also important passwords. So you want to make sure that someone, if you have Facebook, can go in and you can actually change a page over to be a memorial page instead of an active page. There are a lot of other things, and I don't recall if we've spoken about it before, but one of the things we encourage people to do is, because you don't know when you might die, but also when you might become hospitalized and someone else has to step in, maybe handle paying your bills. And I don't know about you, but we're mostly paperless. And I realized my husband would have trouble knowing what things I pay. I would have trouble knowing not only what things he pays, but also how to access them. If my name isn't on a particular thing, they're not going to let me pay a bill. So it is an incredibly important part of that planning.
That wraps up this episode of BRN Weekly. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to, drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the information in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more, all in one place, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. We're back again tomorrow for BRN Sunday. I'll be joined by members of the media, academia, and financial services. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
Are you being audited, and do you owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes? Is the IRS threatening to take more of your money? Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. The IRS can freeze your assets and seize your bank accounts, but you can stop these IRS actions. The Tax Doctor will work with you using our years of experience to represent your case to help you get the best resolution. The IRS to reduce your stress. We've handled thousands of cases, so we know what we're doing. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a Tax Doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Call 800-224-6439.